Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to True Staffing Partners ESI Sales 101, talking about your numbers on an interview. My name is Jared Casalia. I am the founder and CEO of True Staffing Partners. We specialize in e-discovery, data privacy, and cybersecurity talent representation. And I am very excited to be joined today by our Vice President of Recruitment, Sarah Roberts. Sarah, say hello to everybody.
Hello, excited to be here.
So Sarah and I have been placing e-discovery sales representatives over the last 6 years. I think it's been now, Sarah, correct?
Yes.
So Sarah's coming on 6 years with the company, and we've probably placed hundreds of ESI sales professionals over that time alone. I myself have placed even more over the 23 years that I've been doing e-discovery staffing. And today's webinar is the first in a series of giving away some of the secrets of success for interviewing as an e-discovery sales professional. And one of the things we do here at True Staffing Partners is prep every candidate before every interview every time. And we just found that after a while, we really codified some of the guidance that we were giving candidates before first round interviews as e-discovery sales reps. And so we're here to share all of that wisdom with you. We're going to talk about how to talk about your book of business. We're going to talk about how to talk about your compensation and performance metrics, which is a little bit different. And we're going to talk about mission critical first interview questions to ask and be prepared to be answered. And finally, we'll have a little fun at the end with what Sarah and I have branded as the kiss of death questions. How do you get a whammy on a first interview? There are ways. There are ways. So let's talk about your book of business. So this quote is mine off to the side. It's not often I get to quote myself, but I figured for this interview, it was a good one. Being able to articulate the nuances and details of your book of business with confidence, regardless of how much revenue you've sold, is what will convince a hiring manager you are a great sales professional. So Sarah, we're going to start getting into how to talk about your book of business. We want to encourage everybody to ask questions in the comments channel. We will answer them on the fly. No question is too mundane or complicated. Come at us with your best questions, everybody. So the first thing you've got to articulate is, what are you selling? Breaking down the services. And there's two primary ways to really break this down. One of them is just simply, hey, I'm selling e-discovery and I'm selling document review. Here's the split. But it's important, if you're able to be able to articulate the nuance of your book. Processing versus hosting versus project management versus forensic collection versus analytics versus review versus trial. And if you're able to articulate the percentages that your book of business hits those separate service items, fantastic. I don't think that level of detail is necessary, but Sarah, would you agree that most of our clients expect you to be able to articulate at least how much is processing, hosting, production, PM versus document review billable hours?
Absolutely, 100%. Prior to an interview or on an interview, just being able to articulate in general is super important.
The next thing is, what are the splits? And there's a lot of things that split when you talk about your book of business. The first thing that's going to split is the one we just described, right? How much is these different services? But now you also want to talk about law firm versus corporate versus channel versus government. Now, most people are selling law firm corporate, and most hiring managers want to hear what the law firm corporate split is in terms of your book. If you are selling business significantly in the channel, meaning you're going to another vendor, or you're selling it through a government agency, you've got a particular contract that you're on, you definitely want to draw attention to that, because it will change the way a hiring manager looks at acquiring your talent and your skill set. The other splits here, there are a couple other splits here too, though. We're also talking about the split of managed service versus transactional, which we're going to get into in a second. We're also talking about the split of geographic boundaries. We're going to talk about that in a second. There's a lot of splits here. The next thing is, who you're selling to, right? Who's your point of contact? You want to be able to clearly say, hey, listen, I'm mainly selling to the C-suite at corporations. I'm going right into the COO or the CISO or the general counsel's office, or I'm selling into lit support on the law firm side of the business, or I really go directly into the partners. I have relationships with partners and senior associates. Who you're selling to will definitely help frame how you go about generating revenue to a potential employer. Sarah, you look like you have a thought.
I was just going to say, and then the size and scope, because sometimes enterprise or those different sizes of AmLaw 100, excuse me, versus 200.
100%. So when you're looking at talking about splits in terms of where your book lies, not only in law firms versus corporate, but also, is it AmLaw 100? Is it AmLaw top 10? Are you fishing in mid-market law firms that have less than 100 attorneys? All of those kind of metrics for how many attorneys, what the size and scope of those portfolio companies inside your book are great ways to create nuance and demonstrate intelligence about how you're articulating your book. The next thing, and we touched upon this briefly, but let's dive a little bit deeper, is transactional versus subscription-based. So there's a couple of ways to look at this, one of which is also, going back to the split comment, how much is software versus services? So if you're at a company that's selling both, right, which there are companies that sell both, Disco is a great example, right? How much of what you're selling is on the services side versus the software side? Another split to delineate if you're on the software side is how much of this is renewals versus net new accounts in that contract year. And that's also a great way if you're on the services side to delineate business. How much is repeat recurring revenue and how much of it is net new business? Another split to articulate is how many of these are customers you've done business with before versus these are new customers that are net new in this contract year. These are all great ways to articulate strengths in your book, or at least detail in your book, which positions you as an expert. When we talk about transactional versus subscription-based MSA, what we're talking about is in the e-discovery world, there are MSAs that are engaged where you get, potentially preferred pricing, you get annual preferred pricing, or maybe it's a 3 to 5 year program. Maybe you're working exclusively with those kinds of clients. Maybe you're not at all hunting for transactional business, and being able to say, hey, listen, we take a couple second requests, but I got a few managed service customers, and how much of your book is which way is an important distinction. Some people are looking for highly transactional. Some people are looking for highly MSA. Some people are looking for both, and establishing yourself as somebody that understands that differentiation is important. New clients versus repeat recurring, we talked about this. I'm ahead of myself. Manager versus individual contributor. So this comes up a lot. Sarah, would you say that there are an equally proportionate sales leadership jobs as there are to individual contributor jobs in the e-discovery industry?
Negative. There are wildly more individual contributor roles than leadership roles. They come around way more often. They just don't exist as often. Yeah.
If you are managing people now and you are not looking to manage people moving forward, you have to make that abundantly clear as your primary motivator when you go on interviews. It is very difficult to go from management into individual contributor roles. Hiring managers have a lot of trepidation about that. So if you get asked the question on an interview for an individual contributor role, do you like managing people? The answer should be no. The answer should definitely be no.
Question, do you think that it's more important to be proactive about that? Just be ready to respond to that question, both? What should people do to prepare for either that question or being proactive?
It's a great question. And the answer is you absolutely have to get in front of it. You should assume that anyone looking to hire an individual contributor that's willing to interview you, if you're currently in a management position and then moving back into an individual contributor, is assuming that it's not going to work out. And so, yes, you have to get in front of that. They're going to come in with tremendous trepidation. And so the motivation for the sales rep has to be to get out of management. And I'd quickly advise redirecting and saying, I'm looking to make a lot of money. I'm looking to go out and build a huge book, and I don't have time to manage and mentor other people right now. I need to be focused on my customers and bringing in business.
Yeah.
Geographic scope versus named accounts. So in the e-discovery industry, you'll find that there are some customers, and it isn't necessarily based on how big they are, that divide how they attack the marketplace based on geography, meaning we need somebody in the Southeast, we need somebody in Texas, we need somebody in the Northeast, and then others that divide by named accounts. So if you're at a company that runs one way and you're entering a company that runs another, there may be a lot of named accounts that won't be in your territory. So talking about how that functions within your book and how you approach the market and what permissions you may need is an important distinction for you to establish when out on interviews. So now we're going to move into how to talk about compensation. Here's another quote. I don't know if it was me or Sarah that came up with this in preparation for today, but a great sales professional is a mathematician when it comes to describing their comp plan. One of the biggest red flags for hiring managers is somebody who doesn't understand how their own commission plan works, because how can we expect you to go out and broker sales negotiations if you don't understand how your own sales plan works? So it's really important to be able to know your comp plan, talk about it on interviews, be able to talk about what works great for it in you and what doesn't, and mostly be able to articulate it. So the most important thing, and we actually, if you go to truestaffingpartners.com, we have a sales assessment that we often encourage people we represent to fill out. Some of our customers require that they fill it out. That is the last 5 years, year over year, and then these 4 statistics. Now, in some cases, we don't collect all of that data. And Sarah, help us understand what those instances are in which we would not ask somebody for total compensation or base.
Well, there are certain states where it's illegal to ask somebody what they're currently making. So in those instances, we make it a habit to ask about what you'd like to make. So in the breakdown, sometimes you're allowed to, sometimes you're not allowed to. In other instances, I think as a salesperson, you really need to be able to be ready to talk about your compensation plan and really being able to articulate that, because it'll help us help you long term. And it's a red flag to the people interviewing you if you're not able to at least articulate the breakdown and go into that, at least in the sense of like what you're targeting to do, what you want to do.
Our guidance is, unless you really have a solid reason to not articulate your total compensation to a prospective employer as a sales professional, it will likely send up a flare and a red flag. I think it would be difficult to get through an entire hiring process without a sales rep making it very clear, this is what I'm making, this is what I'm looking to make, and how are we going to get there together for mutual success on an interview. Now, having said that, we don't ask those questions when we're not allowed to, but we do ask desired. And we do expect that somebody will give us a very accurate range of base and total compensation that the plan that will be negotiated can hit. Now, when we break down the other numbers, the reason why we touch on these 2 first is because they're in relation to the first 2, right? And every sales rep should know exactly how much revenue they generated year over year for the last 5 years and what the quota was that was associated with that revenue generation. And there may be years where that revenue generation exceeds that quota. There may be years where it is below that quota. And what a hiring manager is looking for is how all these numbers are relative to each other, right? It's not just that you hit your quota. It's not just that you exceeded your quota or that you didn't hit your quota. Is what was the quota? What were you making on the quota? What was the revenue? What was the year? 2020 was a very different year than a lot of other years. People are going to take that into consideration. What they're looking for is not just the performance and the numbers cold. What they're looking for is, can you articulate them, and what is the narrative around them? And being able to build a narrative around your success and your performance. Hey, we landed a huge second request this year. My number spiked and I was at 175% of quota. And then the next year I was back at 98, 100% because they moved my quota up another $2 million because I blew it out of the water the year before. And I didn't blow it out of the water because I didn't have a second request the year before, but I still beat what my quota was the year before by another $2 million, which I think is really impressive. I was really proud of that. Now you've built a narrative around what looking at cold numbers might be perceived as a step back, when really it's, hey, listen, I'm somebody that can go and grab big wins and then keep maintaining that momentum to keep generating more revenue year over year, perhaps not as excessive as spike years, but everybody's going to understand there are spike years up and down. Sarah?
What do you think is, also from a quota perspective and being able to articulate the differences and things like that will also help to understand where you're selling and who you're selling to, so that can all be encompassed in really the same conversation.
Agreed. So average deal size is really important. There are a lot of people who have very large deals that they sustain. And we'll talk about client concentration in a second, but average deal size is important, right? Are you going out there and landing, quick forensic projects at 25, 30 grand 10 times a month? Or are you out there landing a second request and that becomes your primary focus for 6 months? Understanding that average deal size is important to an employer because an employer is also scoping, can they handle your business? And that could be big or small, right? Do they have the ability to be as transactional as perhaps is necessary to take that kind of forensic rinse and repeat? Or conversely, do they have the bandwidth to scale to the size necessary to handle something like a 3-month or 6-month second request? So largest matter, size and scope. Everybody's going to want to hear about the big wins. And that should be part of your narrative too. And when you talk about those big wins, you want to talk about the anatomy of that deal. And I think we could do a whole nother session, Sarah, on talking about the anatomy of a deal. But it really starts with talking about how you got introduced to that customer, how you were able to win the RFP, how you were able to hand that off to client services for delivery, how you managed that account over the case, what were the document sets and sizes, what was the sensitivity, who were the stakeholders, all these things that we've kind of articulated and outlined as being part of your narrative, telling that in a story capacity with a very traditional burger style storytelling methodology, beginning, middle, and end. Give me the meat in the middle. I want lots of fixings on my burger when I'm interviewing salespeople. So yeah, I want to know about the things that went wrong and how you triaged it. Yeah, I want to know about how you saved a customer $1.2 million by running analytics and putting a natural language programming overlay on top of a specific set of documents or telephone records that needed to be ingested. And we were able to do it without having to use a lot of human review. And here's how we did it. Yeah, I want to hear about all that. That matters. And this is where you really get to show off that you're an expert and not just a sales professional.
And concise examples, like be thoughtful about it, prepare for those types of questions and prepare for that answer so that it is clear and concise. You're not you're not going on and rambling, but you have a very specific example and you're not just saying, yes, I can do that. Yes, this is my average deal size. It's the story behind it that will really help your potential employer to really, break down the type of salesperson you are and what you could really do to make an immediate impact on the organization.
Great storytellers tell stories again and again and again and again. That's what makes them great storytellers. So you are going to want to rehearse some of this, which seems foreign, right? You're a sales rep. I can sell anything. I'm a killer. Jared, I can sell myself. But the reality is that most sales reps struggle with selling themselves because they don't know themselves and haven't taken inventory of themselves or their career or their highlights and documented it and taken the time to translate that inventory and documentation into re-articulation of expertise. You can talk about your customer all day long, but can you talk about your book in the same way? And it really is a skill that requires rehearsal. Moving on to client concentration. This is really important. If you've got an 80-20 split and 80% of your book is in 1 or 2 customers, people are going to want to know that. If you're somebody that's got 150 different customers you're transacting with a year, that's going to require a different level of maintenance. And so understanding client concentration is something you should feel comfortable talking about on an interview and will often get asked if it isn't volunteered. Accelerators. So we're going to do a whole separate session, if this is well received, on how to structure an ediscovery comp plan, incentivizing the right behavior from your ediscovery sales reps. But we do want to touch upon accelerators here because accelerators or variations in comp plan and commission variable are meant to incentivize behavior. So if you're at a company, like for example, a few years ago, my company, more than a few years ago, my company gave a special commission incentive for cybersecurity deals because we were moving into that vertical and I wanted to incentivize my sales reps to really bring in cybersecurity business so they made more money placing cybersecurity people one year than they did e-discovery people. We don't do that anymore. That was part of a particular year's comp plan where we wanted to incentivize a particular set of behaviors to accelerate the growth of the business in a particular vertical. Comp plans are going to change every year. Knowing how yours has changed, what those accelerators are that have changed, and the behaviors you've had to change to accommodate the business, maybe not yourself, but the business and the business goals, and having the maturity to be able to talk about your accelerators in that way and how they've incentivized or perhaps disincentivized the behavior that will lead to your ultimate success is a very sophisticated sales professional.
I know we're going to go into this in more detail when we kind of do this separate webinar, but how would you go about finding out if your accelerators are in line with other people's in the market and things like that, even though they may be intended to really imply certain behaviors that year or, that contract year or something?
Great question, because there's not a single customer that we have whose comp plans are exactly the same.
Yeah.
Everybody's comp plans are different. They all have slight nuance, whether it's at a percentage point basis or you're going to get different percentages on different lines of service or on different customers, net new versus legacy, or on hosted data. You don't get any commission on that after 12 months or 24 months, or at this company, you can get it perpetually. It's not just the percentage variables. And it's really important that sales reps are looking at the bigger picture. What I'll do to try to answer your question though, Sarah, is I'll say this. In general, we find that the take-home total comp pay, not including benefits, for an e-discovery sales rep tends to fall between 8 and 13% of revenue. So if you're doing $1 million in revenue, you're probably making between $80,000 and $130,000. Now, the reality is that an underperformer may actually wind up sucking up more percentage than somebody who's right on track. And an overperformer may wind up sucking up more of a percentage than somebody who's right on track. Polar extremes tend to put the percentage of revenue that someone is taking home as a sales rep at the higher end of the range, and people that are in the comp plan tend to fall right in the middle. And to some extent, I think that makes a lot of logical sense, right? If somebody's not hitting their numbers, they're costing the company more money. If somebody's hitting their numbers out of the park, they're making a lot more than somebody that's just right on track. And that's the way a good comp plan probably should work, right? If you're making excessively more than that, you should be prepared for a comp plan readjustment in a down economy, which is what we are in right now. If you're being incentivized only to bring in new business, maybe you look at a company that really values and rewards from a commission perspective, maintaining legacy business, right? All of these variables that we've laid out for you today are also the same variables that a hiring manager is thinking about when they're crafting your quota and crafting your accelerators and your variable commission plan. Cool. Equity stake. In 2021 and 22, we brokered more deals here at True Staffing Partners for sales professionals who had an equity earn-in opportunity or immediate investment in equity when joining a startup than we have probably in the 8 years prior to those 2 years. There's a lot of equity being put on the table from boutiques. The e-discovery industry, from a vendor perspective, is very polarized. You have very large players that are doing 100 million plus, and a lot of players that are doing under 35, 40 million, and very little in between. And part of that is because of the acquisition strategy and the roll-up that's been happening in the industry for the last decade. And as a result, you're going to find that smaller players are going to offer equity stake, but sometimes so are bigger players. The payday for the smaller players, if it works out really well, could be significantly higher financial rewards than going to a $500 million company that's giving you some stock in either publicly traded or privately traded, soon to be publicly traded, or promise of being publicly traded stock. Now, the caveat here that may be different for that is software companies. But software companies have taken a very big hit over the last 4 months and probably will continue to do so for the next 2 to 3. I think there'll be a nice bounce back. They've had to make a lot of hard decisions, letting go staff in order to create margin. But I think the worst is sort of behind us. It might get a little bit worse before it gets better. But equity stake may have significantly higher value at a software company than it might a services company in e-discovery. Cool. Last, one of the things we find that sales reps are often inept at articulating is what their health benefits are and what the contributions to the payment of their health benefits are. And those can be wildly different depending on what service provider you're working for, right? Knowing that and making that part of the negotiation prior to the negotiation, right? If you're at a big company that pays your entire family's benefits in full, and you're going to a small company that's going to offer you equity at a liquidity event, but they're only going to pay your individual coverage, that might be several $1,000s in gap that you are picking up on a monthly basis. And knowing that, accepting that, or negotiating against that as early as the first interview and making those expectations clear is guidance that we give. Cool. So we've got a few more minutes. We're going to jump into mission critical questions for first round interviews. You will get asked, number one, why are you considering a change? Sarah, what's the number one reason why people are considering a change?
some sort of event has occurred, personal, merger, change in comp plan, lots of things, but it's some sort of like, you can pinpoint the actual event that happened. And then, that's really what escalates the search.
Couldn't agree more. Acquisition is a big one. 2, why are you interested in this company? This is your place to show that you've done your homework. And Sarah, what should somebody not say if they're asked this question on an interview?
You should really not say like, oh, your brand recognition is so great, so I'm so interested in you. I mean, that's what the company's bringing to the table, but like, what are you bringing to the table?
That's right. That's right. No sales hiring manager wants to hear that you want to work for them because they've got a great brand. What you could do is say all the great things that the brand stands for culturally, what they give back to the community, that you get beat by them out in the marketplace, and you think you'd be better off selling for them. All of these things are great reasons to be interested in the company. Their brand recognition is not. Number 3, how do you develop new business? This is we've talked about before. We're not going to linger too much here, but here's your opportunity to talk about your new customer sales acquisition strategy and methodology. Number 4, how do you maintain legacy relationships? So just as it's important to develop new stuff, they want to know how you're going to develop maintain all the people that you've known in the industry. And there are very few, if any, e-discovery vendors that are hiring people that don't have e-discovery sales experience. So chances are you've done this before. Number 5, what resources do you need in order to be successful? Be careful how you answer this question, because if you say absolutely nothing, that may be what you get. And if you say, I need everything under the sun, an ISR department, a marketing team, I need my own individual resource to do my cold calling for me, and I'll be all good to go generating a couple $1 million worth of revenue, that may scare them away as well. So be careful what you ask for. The best answer is probably somewhere in the middle. All right, we got 3 more minutes. Let's talk about the questions you should ask. Now, this is probably maybe the most important information we're going to share with everybody today, because most of our sales candidates, despite having decades of experience, are not thinking about asking these 5 questions. And in my opinion, only these 5 questions on a first round interview as an e-discovery sales rep. Number 1, what is your first year quota? You straight up ask, give me the number, man or woman. Number 2, how many of your reps are hitting that number in the first year? Right? 0, 1, 2. Okay. Question number 3. What makes the people hitting the quota in their first year successful? How are they doing it? Right? And you're not interested in anything past the first year on a first interview. It's a first date. It's not the proposal. It's a first date. How do I know I'm going to make you happy the first year? That's all I need to know. Because if I can do that, we'll be happy for the rest of our lives. Question number 4. Beyond a quota, what are the other KPIs you're going to measure my success for? So one of the questions we're going to tell you never ask on an interview, this is the better way to ask that question, right? There are ways to judge performance that go beyond how much revenue you've sold. What are they? Number 5, what's the greatest differentiator for this business? Because that's what you're going to have to go and sell to every single customer in this space in order to win business. This is how we at this company are different. So hear it from everybody you talk to if you're interviewing as an e-discovery sales rep. All right, Sarah, let's close with some fun. And then any questions? I don't see questions in the comment section. Everyone's just so engaged they can't put their fingers on the keyboard. So we thought we'd end with some fun stuff, which is first interview, kisses of death. This is what you shouldn't say on a first interview. I've got other offers. I really need you to move quickly. Sarah, why shouldn't I say that?
I mean, it doesn't matter the size of the company or anything, but you're essentially asking them to accelerate their process at your benefit, and they don't even know you yet.
Agreed.
We kind of touched on this, but Jared, why is it such a kiss of death to tell somebody that they prefer to manage people when they're interviewing for an individual contributor role?
You'd be amazed how many people we say don't do this, and then they do it anyway because it's actually the truth. And if that's the truth, just stay out of individual contribution, because people don't want their time wasted. It will be egg on the face. Number 3, my book of business follows me wherever I go. Sarah, why is that not?
It may not. It likely won't. You really need to sell yourself and interview for the company, and they're really investing in you and your sales style and what you can bring to the table, but you can't promise the book of business. You can't control your clients.
100%. I think most clients would say, I don't believe you that we work with.
What about those that say they don't cold call?
You got a cold call. You're not above anything, right? Look, I'm the CEO of a Inc. 5000 fastest growing company. 3 of the last 6 years, I cold call every single day of my life. That's the job, man. Or woman. Can I demo the software before I interview Sarah?
Please don't. It gets awkward. Go look on YouTube. You know, it's not a good look to go try to be a client before your interview. It's just not a good idea.
And this last one is an interesting one because some people probably would debate this with us.
Yeah, like why would it not be a good thing to say, you know, hey, I'm not going to drive revenue in the first 12 months?
Look, what it's signaling to the customer is that you're probably not. It's also signaling that you doubt their experience and knowledge of how difficult it is in the first 12 months to drive extreme amounts of revenue. Even if you're a $10 million a year player moving to a new company, you may only do $1 million or $2 million in the first year because it takes some time to generate a new book in a new place. And so checking with the employer as if to say that they may not have the appreciation is the wrong way to go about getting that information, right? If we think about some of the guidance we gave before, like what are those KPIs beyond revenue, that's a much more productive way to give you instruction on how you can meet expectations beyond just hitting revenue targets. Well, we're at the half hour. We like this to be fast. I think we hit it right on the money. We're right at Q&A. So if anybody's got any questions, please pop them in the comments. And if not, I hope everybody found this really valuable. I hope this gets some fun playback out on LinkedIn. And the reality is that the guidance we've given, though it's been given through the prism of e-discovery sales professionals, is really guidance for any sales professional who's out there looking to present themselves better on an interview. And if there's anybody out there who needs representation, we love our sales reps. We love making them better at being their best selves on interviews. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at truestaffingpartners.com. We keep all of our sales reps that work with us very confidential. And we thank everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, Jared.
Bye, everybody.